Hello and welcome to LionWing Talks, a weekly show about all things LionWing. I'm your host, Bradley Hailstorm, founder and, president of LionWing and the host of the show. LionWing Talks is a weekly stream where we discuss LionWing games. I answer community questions. I go over project updates, and we just kind of talk about localization and tabletop games as it relates to the Japanese scene. This is episode 10. So we've been doing this for 2.5 months officially. We will continue to do it. I really enjoy these shows, and we've got no shortage of questions tonight, and I've got no shortage of updates to provide. So lots of stuff on the docket tonight. I'm excited to get into this stuff. We're going to be talking specifically when it comes to project updates. You can look forward to a meaty Embryo Machine update, some good news about Wild Hunt Festival, and then I'll also talk about Gun and Gun a little bit. And I will also talk about LionWing Plays, which is now a sister stream that we have going on that will happen somewhat regularly. I'll talk about that as we get to the end. But nevertheless, thanks for joining us tonight. Thanks to those who have joined us in the chat. How's it going? We got Cy, we got Frank. I'm sure we've got some others in there. Appreciate you joining along. Before we get going, someone in the chat noticed that they thought they noticed a new game in my background over here, but I promise that lineup of games has not changed. So sometimes, though, I'm not going to lie, sometimes I will hide things in plain sight. You never know what they might mean. They might mean nothing. They might mean something. It could be a hint about a future project. It could not be a hint about a future project. Just a little something that I like to do. So if you've been following these shows for at least the past couple of weeks, you know that I've been sick. I was sick for last week's show and the week's show before that. I am feeling better. I'm not totally better yet, but I am like way better than I have been for the past two shows. So I'm feeling particularly energized. What I'm not feeling particularly energized about is the fact that we're 30 minutes late getting this show kicked off. OBS hated me tonight. Really hated me tonight, and was giving me quite a bit of problems. It took me about 20 minutes to resolve it, and then I had some system issues after that. So got off to a rocky start, but fortunately you haven't had to be privy to that if you're watching this as a VOD. You are none the wiser. But nevertheless, there's a little look into the background of what's happening behind the scenes at LionWing Talks tonight. Someone in the chat said, to be fair, when you don't have quality options, I can't watch your video. I'm sorry. Yes, that's true, Sai. Sai, I forgot that you do not watch the video when there's not video quality options. That is fair. Yeah. All right. So as usual, we're going to jump into the community questions first, and then we'll get to our project updates. So starting with the first question, this comes from someone in the Discord. If you knew back then how horrible the SEO would be for Gun and Gun, would you have localized the title differently? No, I would not have, because the SEO is only broken when it comes to Board Game Geek. If you type in Gun and Gun in your Google search, the first thing that comes up is our Kickstarter. So SEO, not broken. BGG SEO, yeah, absolutely broken. I'm not too broken up about that, though. No pun intended. That being said, I had considered at least one other name for the localized title of Gun and Gun, and it wasn't terribly different. It was more just kind of a stylized version of Gun and Gun, and I can't even say it was going to be, because it never got to the stage where I was like, yeah, this is going to be it, and then I changed my mind and went back to Gun and Gun. It's always been Gun and Gun, but there was a time when I considered, I wonder if it would be more interesting to call this Gun Cross Gun, so using kind of the X between the two guns. And I liked that aesthetic a whole lot, so I messed around with just some preliminary logo mock-ups just to see what it would look like, and there was some really cool things you could do with that. It never got beyond that, though. We never went beyond that. Winona was the graphic designer on Gun and Gun, and it didn't even get to her. So if it didn't get to her when she started doing all of her actual official logo mock-ups, if it didn't get to her, then it was never a serious idea, but it was something that I messed around with by myself for a little bit, and I really liked the look of it. I thought it looked really slick. There was a lot that you could do with that cross sign, the X, but ultimately, I thought people aren't going to know how to pronounce this. I mean, that's the problem. Are they going to say, oh, it's Gun and Gun? Are they going to say gun cross gun? Are they going to say gun X gun? There were so many ways that people could mess up the pronunciation of that. And if there are more than one way to mess up the pronunciation of something, especially when it comes to a game title, people will find it and people will mispronounce that game, for the rest of eternity. So ultimately I wanted to avoid that kind of thing. And that was the deciding factor to say, I don't think I really even need to explore this idea any further. So that was the only other title that I half considered. I really liked just the name Gun and Gun. I thought it was catchy, and I didn't know that I was going to run into search issues when it came to Board Game Geek. I never thought that was going to be an issue. So if you go to BGG and you try to type in Gun and Gun, actually nothing comes up, which is wild. I had reached out to BGG, to their admins early on in the process when I first submitted the Gun and Gun page, and said, "Hey, I'm noticing when I type in my search box, like my game isn't coming up." And I mean, they tried to be helpful. They really did. They passed me around to probably 3 or 4 different people, and no one really knew kind of what was going on. And I finally got to a point where I was like, all right, this is going nowhere. I'm not going to get this resolved. It is what it is. So if you type in gun into the BGG search, it'll pull up a list of every, game in their database with the word gun in it. And you can find it that way, and it's not ideal. So our BGG page for Gun and Gun will probably not be found. I mean, unless someone is searching out the BGG page specifically and they either have a link or they go to like our publisher page and then catch our linked games and then go to Gun and Gun from there. I think it's probably a lost cause at this point, it's unfortunate, but it's not the end of the world. Like I'm not terribly upset about it. It's not ideal. I'd like people to be able to type in Gun and Gun in our game to pop up, but it seems that BGG and their team doesn't really know how to make that happen. So I'm out of luck there. The next question: How far along the maturity track is the competitive support of Gun and Gun in Japan? Are there tournament rules, structures, judges, prize supports, leaderboards? No, there's nothing that organized. There's been Keep Dry, the designers of Gun and Gun, have run events and they've run local tournaments, but there's nothing kind of universal. There's nothing organized. There certainly are no leaderboards. In fact, when I told Keep Dry that I had sort of grander plans for a competitive scene for Gun and Gun, they were really excited. And I can't remember Ken's exact words, but it was something to the effect of, "Hey, like, do you think we could do something, to sort of riff off of that for our own scene, for the Japanese scene?" And it's like, yeah, of course, I've got no issue with that. But that was kind of an indication that they have nothing in place. And I mean, without being a publisher, it's kind of hard to get those things rolling in many instances. And Keep Dry is they're a small indie team and they're spread out, and the pandemic has made everything harder when it comes to that. And so nothing ever really got off the ground. I mean, Gun and Gun launched like 5 months before COVID hit. So even if they had wanted to get a tournament scene or some sort of competitive scene going, they wouldn't have really stood a chance, which is unfortunate. So how far along the maturity track is the competitive support for Gun and Gun in Japan? I don't know, like not anywhere on the track, I guess is my answer there. There are no tournament rules at this time. Really, we at LionWing, we're going to be finding out what all that stuff is with the virtual league. And the virtual league will be a bit of trial and error as well. This is the first time, obviously, that we're doing something like this. This is the first time that I'm doing something like this, even outside of LionWing. So there is going to be some kind of feeling it out as we go, which is to be expected to some degree. We'll find out what works and what doesn't work pretty quickly, and then we'll adjust accordingly. I think on the Gun and Gun Kickstarter campaign page, I have just like a link to kind of like a mock-up portal for Gun and Gun's competitive site with a leaderboard. I mean, that's my big thing is I want a leaderboard, and then of course I want prizes to go along with that. And it's much easier when I myself can run the competitive scene. It's much easier to keep track of all of that. It's much easier when it's all going down in our Discord. So I'm looking forward to kind of ironing out the details of the virtual league. I don't have them all ironed out right now, but over the next couple of months, I hope to have them ironed out. The plan was to have the virtual league pop off probably 2 months, 6 weeks after folks get their physical copies in their hands, because that gives people about a month and a half, in some cases 2 months if we end up on the 8-week side of things, to really test the game out, to play it, to learn it, to begin to understand the intricacies, and to put together some strategies that make sense to how they play. And so, sitting somewhere between that 4 and 8 week range, I think is enough time to then say, all right, so we've all had a chance to check this out. We kind of know it. We know how it's played. We know how we want to play it ourselves. Now let's do something with it. So you'll probably see the virtual league jump off at this point, the end of summer. I'd hoped to have it going by like July, but with gun and gun not, with it being behind and us looking at, a June or July delivery, then we're looking at 4 to 8 weeks after that. So we are looking at end of summer for having that virtual league take off. The third question: when a publishing company is working on localizing a game and launching it via Kickstarter, how do y'all go about adding new characters, cards to the project via stretch goals? Are they already completed in the foreign copy of the game, or does the localization company look into the game and work out making something new to add on? Yeah, so I can't speak. This was a question that was asked either yesterday or the day before in the chat, and then I just threw it into my show notes thinking that other people might want to hear the question in case they weren't in the chat at the time we were discussing it, and then also hear the answer to something like this. So I can't speak for any other publishing company, localization company, of what their practices and procedures are, but I can tell you mine. Most of the time for our Kickstarters, we commission Kickstarter exclusive stuff or LionWing exclusive stuff. And the designers know that going in. I tell folks that up front. It's in the licensing contract. Everyone kind of knows what they're getting into in that regard, that they're going to produce additional artwork. They're going to get paid for it, and that artwork is going to be exclusive for us. However, in some cases, I work out a deal with the designers to say, yeah, so I'm going to commission the stuff. Everyone's going to see it for the first time in the English release, and realistically, everyone's probably going to get it in physical form for the first time in the English release. But if you would like to release it as a separate content pack for your audience, yeah, sure, that's fine by me. And we just write that into the contract as well. Wild Hunt Festival is a great example of that. So Ramos-san and his team at Liner Note, produced a ton of extra stuff for that Kickstarter. And because they produce so much, and because there was so much involved in the Kickstarter extras for Wild Hunt Festival, as opposed to say like Gun and Gun, it would have been in poor taste and not terribly fair had I said, all right, you're going to produce all of this stuff for LionWing and the Kickstarter backers, and then you're never going to be able to use it again. Because I mean, we added a new mode, we added a slew of new characters and bosses, we added a bunch of story stuff. It felt wrong to not give them the opportunity to use the stuff that they had worked so hard on. I mean, it wasn't like they were just producing promo care, like alternate art or something like that. This was stuff that they had to play test and balance and really play test. And oh, by the way, they had to do it in the middle of a pandemic as well. So hazard pay, if nothing else, was needing to be awarded to Liner Note and Ramos-san himself. So so we talked that, yeah, you can release this for your own audience as well. And they did that. Gun and Gun, however, that stuff is ours. Now, if Ken came to me and was like, hey, we really want to release the manga versions of the cards that y'all unlocked via the stretch goals, are you open to that? I'm going to be open to that. I'm never going to tell a designer that they can't use something that they created for a game that they designed. That's just it. That's bad business. And that's just being kind of I don't know, a shitty business person. But yeah, so most of the time that stuff though we go out of our way to commission and we do it up front and it's all written into the contract and everyone knows what they're getting into when they sign on. I mean, like when I first start talking with someone and I tell them that, hey, I think this game is going to be a Kickstarter, here's what comes along with that. So like before you say you want to do this licensing partnership, make sure you're up to the task because it's going to be a lot of work on your end. Now, the good news is we try to make it as easy on our partners as possible. We do all of the text insertion. We do everything, and we don't require the designers to do anything if they don't want to. So essentially what it boils down to is our Japanese partners just like give us a huge asset dump. We take all the assets and then like we do all the work for the rest of the entire project. And they never have to do anything ever again other than answer our questions that we have as we're going through and translating things and playtesting things and trying to figure out, did we get this mechanic right? Like, is this wording accurate? And so they need to be there to answer those questions, but we really try to make it as pain-free as possible on them. However, you do have projects like Wild Hunt Festival, where Ramo-san wanted to directly be involved in the graphic design work on the English edition. And so Wild Hunt Festival was unlike any of the other games that we did, in that Ramo-san handled all of the English graphic design work himself when it came to the game components. All the other games, we've handled that stuff ourselves, but he wanted to be involved in that process. And it was really easy to communicate with Ramo-san. He's bilingual. And so it was easier for things not to be lost in translation. And so because he wanted to be involved, because the communication was super easy, and because it kind of makes sense with where we were at with our release schedule and where all the teams were when they were working on various games, it was like, yeah, actually, Ramo-san, yeah, totally, let's do this together. And so he and I were the driving forces behind the English localization of Wild Hunt Festival. So again, I don't know how other companies handle these types of things. I'd imagine it's probably similar, but that's how we do it. Another question here, not necessarily about any of our projects, but a general question perhaps. Are there any specific card games, TCGs or TCG-like card games that are active in Japan right now that I like? I saw we also have a question in the chat. I'll get to that here in just a second. Yeah, so I don't actively play any of the kind of like larger published TCGs in Japan. I naturally gravitate toward Dojin, indie stuff. That's the stuff I like. Even long before LionWing came along, and even if you take it outside of like the tabletop industry, I like games from small developers, from independent developers. It's just what I enjoy. And so I can't speak to any of the popular TCGs in Japan, and I can't say that I play any of them actively. I have probably touched all of them in some way at some point, and perhaps I was active in one of those scenes at some time, or at least active with my small, community of players with some of those Japanese TCGs, but certainly not anymore. At this point in my life, I tend to gravitate almost exclusively to the independent stuff, and that's primarily because, yes, I like it, but also it's hard for me to play a Japanese game at this point in the role that I am and with LionWing being my business. It's hard for me to not play a game and not wonder, like, is there an English audience for this game? And so for that reason alone, I tend to stick to the indie stuff. There's actually a pretty healthy indie TCG scene in Japan. Now, I'm going to use the term TCG loosely because, quite frankly, the Japanese tabletop scene and Japanese tabletop designers, specifically Japanese card game designers, use the term TCG very loosely. In most cases, when you see a Dojin indie Japanese TCG, it'll be branded as a TCG, but it's not a TCG at all. There's no blind pulls, there's no packs of cards, there's no regular content drops. You might get a content drop once every 6 months. That's pretty rare. So instead, you'll probably get a content drop once every year. Hardly a TCG. In fact, most of the Japanese independent TCGs are just ECGs. So with that understanding, there are a couple that I really like. I like Hagme a lot. Hagme, it's an acronym for Heavily Armed Girls Mission. Actually, I think I think it's actually grammatically incorrect, and I think it's Heavy Armed Girls Mission, but it's supposed to be Heavily Armed Girls Mission. So I like Hagme a lot. It's probably the the it's probably the Dojin ECG that has the most content in Japan. There's a lot of content for that game. It's a cool game. It's pretty unique. A lot of indie Japanese ECGs or TCG likes feel samey, or if they don't feel alike one another, they feel just kind of, I won't say like a derivative version of something that already exists, like a Magic. A lot of them do kind of feel Magic-ish. So you got to be careful kind of what you're getting into there. Hagme feels very different. I like Hagme for that reason alone, and because there's just a lot of content for that game, and there's a killer PVE cooperative mode. They've released several expansions for Hagme, and one of them was called the Berserk Panzer, which was pretty much a PVE co-op focused expansion entirely. Basically like Marvel Champions. So a cooperative ECG where you go up against big bosses and you build your deck or whatever. But then those same decks that came in that cooperative expansion could also be used just in the traditional PvP game. So I like Hagme a lot. I like Union Border from Team Connection. Union Border is underrated. Really vibrant art, cool mechanics, got a clean card UI. So I feel like Japanese TCGs, ECGs of the independent variety kind of fall into two camps. One is the camp of it looks exactly like Magic. The other is like it's a mess of characters and information and just like card content overload, and it gets in the way of being able to fully enjoy the game. Hagme borders on kind of like that latter category of like there's a whole lot of information being presented on this card. Okay, now Hagme also went under a recent revision, and so they cleaned up their UI, which I like a lot. But Union Border kind of falls a little bit more into the former camp of where it uses Magic as its template, but it implements some nice quality of life changes to that UI. If you can even say Magic's UI needs QOL stuff, but I like the changes that they've implemented. Even though it's clear that they use that as as their base for how they design their card layout. But yeah, so Union Border's cool. Right now it's pretty small, so if you want to get in on it, it's still pretty early in its life. They've got 2 starter sets, 4 decks apiece. They're coming out with another starter set, I think, in the next couple. I think at Game Market. I think. So yeah, Union Border's cool. Really underrated. Even like in the small, indie Japanese TCG scene, Union Border isn't really talked about much. So it's totally an underdog. And then there's stuff like Cardle. Cardle's cool. It's a sort of an idle based ECG. It's really neat. It's small. It's got some really cool ideas about. You're not like battling each other. I mean, you are, but not in the traditional sense of where you're fighting one another. You're trying to win more fans than the other competitor. So that's cool. I really loved Flip Flops' Legions TCG. So Legions was an actual TCG, a true to form, independently run TCG, probably the biggest at the time. But like a lot of the other smaller and indie Japanese TCG designers and games, COVID just completely gutted it. And Legions closed its doors. They stopped production. I think they were going to have another expansion, at least one more expansion, and then they opted not to because of the pandemic. Now, there may have been other factors that we weren't aware of or told about. Perhaps the game wasn't performing well already, and then COVID was kind of the nail in the coffin. I don't know, but Legions was amazing. I mean, really, really good. The art was incredible. I mean, if you know Flip Flops from Heart of Crown, you know what they're capable of artistically. The game was just beautiful, and they were really dedicated to their tournament scene. They ran events all the time, great prizes. The game was like, I won't say expertly balanced, but it was it was finely balanced. That was a fantastic game. And then I really liked Fantasy Star 2 TCG, which also closed up shop. I think last year as well, right as the pandemic hit. PSO2 TCG. I mean, I'm a Fantasy Star like aficionado. Fantasy Star and I go back multiple decades, and so to have a TCG based on that property, it was sort of like a dream come true in many cases, merging two of my favorite things in life. And Sega did a really nice job producing that game, releasing regular content. Also, one of those TCGs that had a PvP or a co-op mode, probably not as in depth as Hagme. Hagme's PvE mode, their cooperative mode, is really in depth, but it was still cool to be able to play PSO TCG in that different way than what you're typically accustomed to. Yeah, so I really liked PSO to TCG. Yeah, so those are some of the games that I like that are active in Japan right now and that I think are worth checking out. There's more. Yeah, there's some more out there. I mean, Detainer's actually pretty cool, although I don't know if it has any more support. It was kind of I mean, you could tell they were working on a shoestring budget with Detainer, but I liked Detainer's ideas quite a bit. And then, this isn't necessarily a question, but in the questions channel in the Discord, I did get two localization recommendations that I'll talk about, and then I'll answer the questions in the chat here. So someone had asked about Overdrive Recross, and I don't know if folks who are watching this right now or who will watch it or listen to the show know about Overdrive Recross, but it's a game that has recently come out in Japan. Probably, I think the first starter set was released, or the first core set, whatever you want to say, was released like a year ago, and then they released another one this past fall. It's a cool kind of Vanquish Sky. So that's the only thing that I can think of off the top of my head. I don't know if anyone has played Kuro's Vanquish Sky, but nevertheless, yeah, Combo Fighter. That was the other game that I was thinking of. That's the game that people will know. So, Overdrive Recross is like Combo Fighter, except I think it's actually more robust. I think it's more replayable. I think the art is freaking beautiful, and it's one of those games that there's not a lot of content out for it right now. I think, it's got two releases, and each release has like 60 some cards in it because each release is divided into two decks, and each deck has like 30 some cards or something to that effect. But, I had reached out to, sorry, pulling up my notes here. I had reached out to Hanya-san over there at Overdrive Games and had just kind of probed to see if they would be interested in a potential localization partnership. My biggest problem with Overdrive is, as a smaller company that's just beginning to gain momentum, we really have to utilize Kickstarter, and we have to be really cognizant of the games that we're presenting on Kickstarter. And so I always get a little leery when a game is presented on Kickstarter that's pretty small, and Overdrive Recross is a small game. Between the two sets, you've got like 100, 105, 110 cards. It's a small game. Now, I did brainstorm. I think there's a way to put a game like Overdrive Recross on Kickstarter and for it to do well and for people to be excited about it, despite it being a game that doesn't have a ton of content. So there are ways to do that. I'm just not sure that the timing is right for us. I know that Hanya-san was not super interested in kind of what I had proposed for a traditionally distributed model for that game. And so our talks never really went any further, but it's one of those games that I like so much, that I think is so good. And it is one of those rare instances of a card battler having a solo mode. Now, it's not a super in-depth solo mode, and it essentially comes down to a rock, paper, scissors type of deciding factor when you're playing the solo mode. It's still cool to have a solitaire version, though, of a battle card game. still, it's something that I've been thinking about. I think about that game often because I really like it. I wish I could just go grab my copy though. I don't. I think it's actually upstairs. It's a beautiful game. If you haven't checked out Overdrive Recross, definitely check it out. They're doing some really cool stuff mechanically, but then also just aesthetically. It's a great game. So I got that localization recommendation. There's kind of where I'm at with that. And then I also got a recommendation for Sword World. So I don't know if the people who are watching this right now are into tabletop role playing games at all. But as I mentioned in either last week's episode or the week before that, when someone asked about what we might have planned in the future, I did say that a game that we've got coming up is a tabletop role playing game. So I'm really into Japanese tabletop role playing games a lot. I love Sword World. Sword World is one of the most popular Japanese developed TRPGs on the scene. I think they're on version 2.5 right now. It is designed by Group S&E, so they're the same folks who created the Embryo Machine property. Now they're not the same folks who designed the Embryo Machine board game that we just kickstarted. That was Mosaic, but Mosaic and Group S&E have a tight relationship with one another, and they work together to create the board game that we just brought to Kickstarter. That was primarily designed by Mosaic. So I'm familiar with Group S&E's work because I've played it. I'm also familiar with them because I have an in with them through Mosaic. The problem with Sword World is, aside from the fact that there is just a shit ton of content, which could get expensive to produce, it is published by Kadokawa, and Kadokawa does not think highly of crowdfunding. I have had more than one conversation with Kadokawa about various projects and have pitched to them the idea of using Kickstarter for some of those projects. And I think I made a pretty damn good pitch about how Kickstarter would actually help grow this game and ultimately grow Kadokawa's brand a little bit. But they view Kickstarter in a very different way. They see it as a devaluing of a property of theirs. If it has to go to crowdfunding, then they see it as kind of a lesser than product, and they just do not want to engage in that. Now, I think there have been some games that have shown up on Kickstarter that have had Kadokawa's name attached to them, but even those games, they have not been able to do a whole lot with them when they came to Kickstarter because of Kadokawa's parameters that they put on those types of agreements. So, one of the Sword Art card games, the one produced by Japanime, I can't remember. Oh, I can't remember what it's called. Sword Fellows or something to that effect. I'm sure someone's screaming at me right now, like, no, it's this, it's this. But I can't think of it. Nevertheless, that was essentially like a pre-order campaign, and it wasn't Japanime's doing. That was Kadokawa's doing. You know, they kind of said, we're not going to allow you to add any additional content to this game. We're not going to, create any Kickstarter exclusives through stretch goals or promo cards. And so you really have to know who your partner is when you're going in to a business relationship with them, so that you know how to plan accordingly. And with Sword World being as big a game as it is, and having so much content in so many ways to try to tackle just the massive scale that game ultimately is at this point, would be really challenging to do without crowdfunding, at least for us. Now, I don't know what's happening with Kodadama. Maybe Kodadama is picking it up for localization. I'm not sure. I haven't heard much out of Kodadama lately, so I don't know what's going on there. But that seems like a game that they might pick up. I would love to localize Sword World. I think 2.5 is awesome. Every edition of Sword World is awesome. And they've got some cool board games based on that property that serve as sort of entry points to the core TRPG, and I would love to do something with that too. I mean, there's so much that you could do with Sword World, but Kadokawa is the gatekeeper there, and that's not the gatekeeper that you want to necessarily work with if you're trying to crowdfund. I mean, Kadokawa is awesome. I've only had great interactions with them, but they are very clear in what they expect, out of a licensing deal, and it just wouldn't really work out to our advantage. So, let's see here. Let me check up with the chat here because I have not been monitoring it as much. Here's a question that I got. Do the idea of making an anime for G&G was though about another way of doing? Sorry, I'm trying to decipher what what exactly is being asked here. Forgive me. That's one of the worst parts about doing this, just live on the air, is sometimes my brain doesn't work super fast enough. Yeah, I mean, they're asking about making an anime for Gun and Gun. I would love to make an anime for Gun and Gun. That's just a multi-million dollar endeavor. The closest thing that we could do for that was the manga that we created, and I mentioned this in I think one of the interviews that I did that's shown on the Kickstarter. One of the first things that I said to Ken Rose of Keep Tribe when we were talking about kickstarting Gun and Gun is I said, I want some kind of lore based book, whether that's like an art book that has lore in it, or whether it's a manga. I want something that allows players to connect with the property in a way other than just playing the game. For me, I love supplementary material. I'm that guy that has all of the Eorzea like encyclopedias for Final Fantasy 14 and all of the additional side content books that come for Final Fantasy 4 or come with Final Fantasy 14, because I want to engage with that property in a way that goes beyond just playing the game. And so I kind of bring that philosophy to a lot of LionWing stuff too. I mean, that's why I create soundtracks for most of our games. It's another way to experience that game and its world. And well, I love soundtracks too, so that's part of it. But it's another way to experience that game, and I think that's important to make when you're trying to make a connection with a game. You need as many avenues to be able to accomplish that as possible, at least in my mind. And so things like soundtracks or art books or the Gun and Gun manga are perfect ways to do that very thing. I would like to produce more for Gun and Gun. As I've mentioned, I really want to support Gun and Gun for as long as it's financially viable, for as long as it's financially successful. And as long as Keep Dry is producing content for it and they're really invested in the Gun and Gun world, then I want to continue producing content for it. And one of the ways to produce content for Gun and Gun is not just through more expansions, more core sets, etc. It's through, side content. It's through more mangas, or it might be through a light novel, or it might be through a soundtrack, because Gun and Gun was not one of the games that we did a soundtrack for. So yeah, I'm always thinking about how can we increase the visibility, to use your word there, the person who asked this question, to use your word. I'm always thinking about visibility of a game and how do we get more visibility on games, and sometimes that's through side content. Someone in the chat said this was about my PSO2 talk. So you have a modded Dreamcast to play PSO on the internet? Yeah, actually I do. I totally do. I'll be honest though. So I'm going to, this is not a popular opinion, and I fully am aware of that. But so PSO Episode 3, Card Revolution, is my favorite Phantasy Star Online game. Now, already people who are listening to this who have played PSO are screaming blasphemy, blasphemy, and that's a that's a fair thing to be saying to me right now. But I love Card Revolution. It's like the best of both worlds that I love. It is a digital card game based upon the Phantasy Star Online license with a killer story. I mean, it's like everything I want, and I have a soft spot for the GameCube. So I love PSO Episode 3. Someone in the chat said, I was a huge avid tabletop role-playing gamer for years. I only recently transitioned from Pathfinder to board/card games due to wanting smaller play sessions and fewer people. Yeah, I mean, that's the problem with TRPGs is you've got to have multiple people to get the most out of that experience. I mean, you can run a game of Pathfinder with 3 people, a GM and 2 players, but like, that's not all that fun. I mean, it can be if you got the right GM and you got the right 2 players. But for me personally, I like bigger games. I like when there's 5, 6 players and a GM. I think I think that's, for me, that's when the best storytelling happens. That's when I'm the most creative. As a GM, that's when I've got the most to work with. So TRPGs are a commitment. Although I think right now, there's never been a better time to get into TRPGs, because there's no longer do you have to go to a physical space and sit around a table with someone and find friends or find someone at your local game store who's like-minded, who you would want to play games with every week for 4 hours at a time. You don't have to do that anymore. You certainly can. I think we're getting back to some of those places. One of my local game shops is back to running their D&D night. But now with Roll20 and Fantasy Grounds and just doing things over Discord or Skype or Zoom or whatever. I mean, there are more ways to engage in with tabletop role playing game properties than ever before, and I think people have really embraced role playing games since the pandemic. I mean, TRPGs were on the rise and have been on the rise since 2016, I would say, and I'm sure there's someone out there who's like, no, it was 2013. That was the year that we started the ascent again into TRPGs being part of a larger part of culture. I would say it's 2016, right around there. But I would say that that rise was accelerated with the pandemic, because it wasn't as easy to get together, or people just simply did not want to get together with their friends or go to their local game shop to play a card game or a board game. But they still wanted to engage in some sort of tabletop game or some kind of tabletop experience, some kind of analog game experience. Oh, what do you know? I can jump into D&D and I can get an experience that's similar to what I would get from playing a board game at my friend's house, and I can do it from my computer at this time when everyone's locked down. Okay, sure, yeah, I'll give it a shot. So I think that COVID has actually helped the TRPG scene, which is kind of wild to think about. And I think that the scene is in a really good place right now when it comes to popularity and the amount of folks engaging in that kind of game. Is there a way for LionWing to work with the creators for simultaneous releases of content? Yeah, so worldwide releases are always cool. It doesn't matter what you're talking about. Simul releases are great, whether it be manga or anime or video games. You don't see it a lot though in the tabletop game market. There's a lot of logistics that get in the way of that. Primarily being how do you time one territory, printing a game, getting that game shipped to them, and then fulfilling that game and or getting that game to retail for it to be sold at the same time as another territory that's trying to do the same exact thing, who's probably working with a different printer, a different freight company, a different fulfiller, and different retailers and different networks of people. It becomes almost impossible to do that in this scene. One of the ways that you can do that, well, I guess there's actually two ways that come to mind that you can do that, is you can work with, let's say we worked with Keep Dry for a simul release of the next Gun and Gun expansion. By the way, this is not happening. I'm just grabbing an example out of thin air. We worked with them on a simul release, and we decided, you know what, we're both going to find a printer that we like. We're going to agree upon using that printer, and we're going to print at the same time. We're going to print two separate versions. We're going to, you're going to pay for the Japanese release. We're going to pay for the English release, or we'll pay for both releases. And, you'll have I don't know, you'll have less of a residual. I have no idea what that deal would look like. I'm just kind of making stuff up. But so they're going to print at the same place at the same time. They're going to go on two separate boats. They're going to go two different ways. Actually, they'll probably go the same way and then eventually break off. But and then we're going to hold on to, whatever our supply is until the other person also has their supply. And we're going to do our simul release like that. That's a way that you could do it. Another way that you could do it is you run a Kickstarter and it's for both versions of the game, the Japanese and the English release. That kind of thing isn't done a whole lot. It is done though. Actually, it's been done at least one time in the last year that I can think of. There was a Kickstarter. I think there was a Kickstarter that ran just a couple months ago, and it was essentially a simul release. Actually, no. It was a trifecta of games. It was a trilogy of games, and the Kickstarter was for both versions, but the Japanese release, I think was targeted for about 4 months prior to the worldwide release. But that's pretty damn close. In this industry, that's basically a simul release. So it can be done. That method has been used before to get close to a simul release. But outside of those two examples that I just gave, I can't think of one off the top of my head that would really work all that cleanly and all that well and be all that effective. Those are kind of your two ways to accomplish that, but it's a lot of work. And some would say, is that juice worth the squeeze? I don't know. I mean, I don't know if there's enough people in this industry that care about simul releases. I mean, maybe there are. I could be wrong about that. For our audience, LionWing folks actually might be more inclined to care about that kind of thing than like a larger audience. I don't know. But I don't think it's super important for this industry to have that, but it is cool. I mean, it is really cool, I think. Yeah. Sai said, hasn't Oink Game done that? Yeah, that's what I was talking about. I was thinking of Oink. Let's see here. What did I miss here? Funny enough, I've been grabbing board games to get away from the computer. I was exhausted with my TRPG game having me sit down at my PC for 7 to 8 hours. Yeah, I already do that at my office job. I want to get off my screen with my game time. Yeah, absolutely. It is one of those things of TRPGs continued to climb and to climb at an accelerated pace over the pandemic, but it did put us right back in front of our screens. And people were already spending too much time in front of their screens and are still probably spending too much time in front of their screens. So you don't get a break from that. So are you really playing an analog game if you're doing it through Skype, Discord, Roll20, etc.? Yeah, I don't know. But a lot of people like it. A lot of people are still able to kind of compartmentalize the two and say, all right, yeah, I'm still on a screen, but this is very different. This is a very different kind of screen time than others. But at the end of the day, it's still screen time. Screen time is screen time. So I will be excited, though, to get back to a place where I go to my local game shop and they've got multiple tables set up and people are running multiple TRPGs. I mean, there's just something that sort of fills my heart about that kind of scenario. I know currently the Mage Noir Kickstarter is doing a simul release, yeah, for the French English version. Yeah, Mage Noir looks super cool, by the way. I was just looking at their stretch goals today. In fact, they've unlocked a lot of content, so they did a lot of fantastic pre-planning and pre-production on all of those stretch goal cards to have them designed with the actual text on the cards, the art finalized. I mean, they clearly had commissioned all of that before they ever went live. And had that ready to show off, knowing that the campaign was going to be a success. So they did some good market research there. Mage Noir looks really cool. It's not necessarily my preferred aesthetic. Obviously, it's not my preferred aesthetic, but it still looks really cool. That game looks very promising. Okay, so those are our questions. Let's get to some project updates. So, Testament, it made port earlier this week. There we go. So I'll use Sai's favorite phrase in the chat. We've never been closer to getting Testament than we are right now. It's true. How long it'll take now to get to the fulfillment center, I don't know where Japanime fulfills their stuff. I don't know where I think they do it themselves, so I don't know where their facility is. I'm assuming it's somewhere in the Northwest. So I don't know how long it'll take to unload and then, transported to the warehouse and then unpacked and scanned in and then sent out. I don't know what that timeline's looking like. I can usually guess how long it's going to take for something to make port, from port to port. I mean, assuming that another ship doesn't get trapped in a vital shipping channel, you can typically kind of guess, all right, it's going to take about this long to go from one port to the next port. But once it makes port in the States, it's a little more difficult to decipher, what those timelines are going to look like, because it all kind of depends on the carrier and what that carrier is like and what you've got to do to get those pallets, off the container ship and checked in and all of that. So it could take 10 days to get to the warehouse. Could take 5. Wild Hunt Festival update. So good news. I got confirmation on Sunday morning, actually. It was Easter morning. I got confirmation that the games had been picked up. Now, I don't have any further shipping details or confirmation yet. It was one of those things where Petra sent me an email and said, hey, your the pallets were picked up. They're on the boat. I will send you details as I get them. But I wanted you to know that's where we're at. So, yeah, that was Sunday. It's been 3 or 4 days since then. So I'm expecting to get some actual like hard detail information, some tracking details this week. I'm hoping by the end of the week or over the weekend. We've been getting a lot of our updates on Saturdays and Sundays, which is interesting because that's never happened before on any other project that I've ever been a part of. So I don't know what's happening there. I don't know if like work hours have shifted in light of COVID or what's going on, but it's interesting that there's so much communication happening on the weekends. I'll wake up on a Saturday and I've got like this email string of the printer talking to consignees and freight companies. I'm like, what, why are we doing work on a Saturday, folks? I mean, I'm glad they're doing it because that means, they're pushing things through and things are getting done and they're not wasting days at this point. But still, it just catches me off guard. I haven't seen that before. So let's say it's on the ship and let's say the ship is set to leave port next week. We're looking at about 12 to 18 days on the water. Our fulfillment center is a state over from us right now, actually a state over from Ohio in Indiana. And so it'll take, once it makes port, I do know these details just because this is our project. So once it makes port in Cali, it'll take about 2 days to kind of get through all the customs and whatnot. And then it'll take 5 days to be transported to Indiana. And then from there, it'll take a day or two to sort of unpack and inventory, scan, all of that. So you're looking at about if the container ship disembarks from port next week, you're looking at about 3 to 3.5 weeks before it gets to our fulfillment center and is unloaded by them. So that puts us right at the beginning of May. And that would mean fulfillment would begin at the beginning of May, which would mean we would hit our revised target date. So, that's pretty exciting. You never know what you're going to get with a revised target date, and you definitely don't know what you're going to get when you're revising a target date, a target delivery date in the light of a global pandemic. I did as much calculation as you possibly can do in that kind of situation. And I mean, I guess I did enough because it looks like we're going to deliver when I said we would. But I'll tell you what, I mean, it's total crapshoot in some cases. In some cases, I mean, I listen to folks who have been in this industry for a long time saying like, it'll probably take this long because of this and this and that. But it's like, no one's been in this situation before. Like, I don't care if you've been in the fulfillment game for 20 years. You've never been in the fulfillment game during a global pandemic. You just haven't. And so everyone was, I think, kind of guessing. And you make the best educated guess you can. And I think we did that. But nevertheless, this is really cool. To use the phrase from before, we've never been closer to getting Wild Hunt Festival in your all's hands than right now. I'm so excited for this. I mean, to be hit with basically a 6-month delay is like the worst fucking thing ever. I mean, and it's terrible to have to relay that information to people. I mean, that is not a fun conversation to have. Now, fortunately, like everyone was like super cool, which I mean, just like, it gives me goosebumps thinking how cool everyone was about that when they could have been rightfully so pissed off and angry. And I'm sure people were pissed off and angry, but they didn't express that. Everyone kind of expressed an understanding of, look what's going on around us. We get it, dude. If it's got to be delayed, it's got to be delayed. And so that was really cool. It was really neat to see everyone kind of just rally around the idea of, all right, like, that's not great. That's not ideal, but it is what it is. You can't do anything about it. And we get it. Look what's happening. So we'll just ride this out and hope that we get it in May. And hey, looks like we're going to get it in May. Okay. Gun and Gun. according to DHL tracking, I should get my proofs on Friday. So it's taken them even longer than they had originally anticipated me getting those proofs after revising when I would get those proofs. So yet again, very slow, but DHL says they're going to be here on Friday. They'll be here on Friday. I'm excited to really look at those things. I am nervous. I'm always, always, always nervous to get proofs because you never know if those proofs are going to come to you and you're going to be like, I hate this so much. Or if you're going to be like, you know what, this looks great. This is exactly what I wanted. Most of the time, it's somewhere between the two. You find things that you're like, this is perfect. And other things where you're like, yeah, not so much. That's how it was with Wild Hunt Festival. I'm hoping that we keep the not so much items to a minimum so that we can fast track this along. I really want to get this to backers in the summertime, but I'm also not going to send folks a shitty product just to get it to you quickly. I'm not. I think about that Miyamoto quote all the time, and that is so true, especially in this industry. I'm not going to send out a shoddy product that people spent their hard-earned money on, especially at a time when hard-earned money is hard to come by, given the circumstances, just to get it to them quickly. I'm not going to make that compromise. It'll never happen. So my hope is that there aren't a lot of items that need to be revised. I suspect that there'll at least be one. I'm worried about the storage box. As I mentioned before, I think the storage box is going to be the thing that trips us up, especially, this being our fourth project now and doing this a number of times and beginning to kind of see where you typically get tripped up when it comes to certain components. And I have a sneaking suspicion that the storage box is going to be the thing I want changed. So that's gunning. That's the big update for Gun and Gun. The other Gun and Gun update is we played Gun and Gun just a couple days ago on our very first stream, the very first episode of LionWing Plays. Thanks to everyone who came in and joined us on Twitch and in the Discord. We actually had, for us, we had record viewership on a Twitch stream, which was awesome. So a lot of people were excited to see that played. We got great feedback on it. We also did a debrief. Sin Theory, Real Beans, and I did a debrief about what went well, what didn't go well, what we should continue to do, and what we should change for the next ones. So the show didn't go off exactly as planned, but it went off well enough, and I was happy with it for a first outing, that we're going to be carrying over a lot of what we did there to episode 2. But we're also going to be making some changes, primarily with the amount of cameras that are being used on the stream. We're probably only going to use one camera for gameplay. That way you get a larger viewing area, and the person controlling the camera will be a spectator. That way we don't have anyone screen watching in terms of what cards the other individual is playing, that kind of thing. So we've got some stuff that we're going to do differently. What's most exciting, though, is that I was just talking to both of those guys earlier today. I had mentioned that LionWing Plays was going to be a semi-regular show that up until just this afternoon, I had pitched it as something that we were going to do periodically. It might be, every 2 weeks. It might be every 3 weeks. It might be every month. We might catch a few weeks where we do it every week, but it was going to be not consistent. But just as of, I don't know, 6 hours ago or something, we did decide that we're gonna do it weekly, and we're gonna do them on Mondays. And I think we're gonna do episode 2. I think we're gonna start that schedule this coming Monday. I need to confirm with them to make sure they're on board with that. But I think that's what we're shooting for. So it is going to be a weekly show. Mondays, it won't be at 7 like it was this past time, just because 7 o'clock is just not a great time for me, but it will be at 9, probably from 9 to 10. So it'll be an hour-long show like this show is supposed to be. We might go over, just like I do in this show. So it'll be 9 p.m. EST on Twitch, also in the Discord. You can join us or whatever. And it's not just going to be us playing. So if you want to play Gun and Gun and you want to be on stream, and a lot of folks were cool with being on stream this past week, join up, get in the Discord and just let us know as we're going live that, hey, if you can, you'd like to grab a seat, and we will definitely figure out a way to slot you in, because I don't think Sin Theory and Real Beans want to be the only ones playing. And it was really cool to be able to have folks from the community playing, and have us there to answer questions and to talk strategy, and also for them just to be on stream. I think that's a cool experience. I think it involves the community in the way that I want to involve the community. And I think people liked the overall experience, and what the final product was. And I think the overall experience and the final product is even going to be better as we continue to do this and get more experience under our belt, and kind of home in on what we really want the show to look like and what we want it to be about. But I would say for our first outing, we got more than halfway to where we want to be, which is a real win in my book. I went into that knowing that, all right, we're just going to see what happens tonight, and then we're going to course correct, accordingly. And that's what we're doing here. So those are your gun and gun updates. Someone in the chat said, can you give me an example of things that come up when evaluating proofs? Like what kind of errors happen at the production facilities? Mostly just interested in the manufacturing process and errors that can occur. Yeah. So I'll talk about Wild Hunt Festival because it's the one that's closest right now. So they sent me one of our stretch goals it was an upgraded thematic metal first player marker, and everything, like when they sent me the digital proofs of what it was going to look like, everything looked good. The coloring was exactly what I wanted it to be. When the physical proofs actually showed up to me, I wish I had it. Oh, no, I don't have that over there. I wish I had it on me. But when the physical proof finally showed up to me, it was basically just like a silver coin. It had no coloring on it, had no coloration. It was supposed to be silver and black. It wasn't. And so that was one of those situations where I was like, where did that go wrong? Because the digital proof that they showed me had coloration. And then at some point, there was no coloration put into the physical proof, and they still thought, and then something happened and they thought it was still okay to send me that. So that's an example of something going wrong. I think back to Testament. So we had a similar issue with Testament when it came to the thematic first player token in that game as well. Now that one was a much bigger token. It's a big ornate torch, essentially. Now I wasn't involved in the production process of Testament. I just knew what was going on because, Heather would give me updates about where things were and what challenges they were running into. But that was another one where the coloration, the silver was all wrong. So gun and gun, where I think we might go wrong a little bit when I talk about that storage box is it looks like the dimensions are a little off. The box looks a little too deep. So that's one of those things that, we planned out dimensions. We went through and we measured out how deep we wanted the box, whatever. We put in cards, we sleeved the cards. We looked at, all right, how much room do we want on each side, et cetera, et cetera. We sent those dimensions to them. They created what they came up with. And from the pictures, I thought to myself, that looks bigger than what I wanted. So even though we had gone through and we had done all of the measurements, that doesn't necessarily mean that when it actually runs through the press, the printing press, that doesn't mean that your dimensions are going to be 100% accurate. In fact, most of the time they are not. They are not 100% faithful to the dimensions that you had originally agreed to and identified, just because of calculation error, how printing machines are set up. As great as they are, they're not perfect things, and so you might get a cut that's a little smaller than anticipated, and that smaller cut could mean that your cards don't fit in when sleeved, but they do when not sleeved, and that's a big fucking issue. That's a big problem that I don't want to have. Another issue is you're communicating with folks who are bilingual, but English isn't their first language, and so you might use a term that you very much so know what's implied and what's meant from that term, but they're just kind of grabbing the closest reference point for that term, and so they come back with something like a dice tray that has felt on the bottom when you didn't want felt on the bottom of that dice tray. You wanted it to be a kind of a hardback dice tray. But something got lost in translation, so to speak. And that's an issue. We had an issue with, and this wasn't something that I talked about because it wasn't a big deal and it was quick. I knew exactly what needed to happen. But with Wild Hunt Festival, they had sent us collapsible dice trays actually that were smaller than originally anticipated. Now they sent me 2 copies. They sent me like a gray one, which I never asked for gray, but they sent me a gray one anyway. So that was another thing. I was like, where did the gray come from? I don't know how we got there, but here we are. I got a gray dice tray and I don't want that color. I want blue. But one of the dice trays was smaller and I was like, oh yeah, no, I definitely like the blue one. I love the color. Let's stay with the color and definitely, the size. I don't, the gray one's too small. And I think their response was like, oh, okay. I thought you might like the smaller size. And so it was one of those moments of, I don't, I don't know what made you think I would, but I mean, cool that you gave me options. I appreciated that. And that's why I like that printer a lot. The printer that did Wild Hunt Festival and Testament. I like those printers because they do kind of take some liberties and say, hey, you didn't really tell me that you wanted this, but what do you think of it? We've been in this printing game for a long time and we think this looks good. You didn't identify it as something that you wanted to do, but we think based on the components you got, it would look good on your components. And it's like, yeah, actually. So, in fact, that printer was the one that came up with this box size. So, if you're watching the video, you can see the Wild Hunt Festival box back there. I had envisioned a much smaller box for Wild Hunt Festival, and so they sent me the proofs, and my main contact there, like the account manager, was like, "All right, so I know you sent us for a box size that was much smaller, and we can totally do that for you." But what do you think about this box with the matte finish? And it was like, again, one of those moments of like, I didn't ask for that, but yes, absolutely we're doing that box. All day we're doing that box and we're doing that matte finish on that box. So sometimes things can go very wrong in the proofing process. Other times you get winners like the Wild Hunt Festival box that come out of the proofing process that you never had asked for. So I don't know if that answers your question exactly, but I think that probably gives you enough information to kind of glean from it what you need. All right. So, and then the last update tonight is some Embryo Machine stuff. So we have not shown off much of the digital STL files. We've been hard at work. We're actually almost done with them. I think we've got 2 more EMs to produce. But I wanted to use tonight to first show off some of these stills of Arachne and also Fornice. Now, we will be putting these images in the Embryo Machine update that I'm either going to post tomorrow or Friday. Haven't decided which day I'm going to post it, but these images will be in there with some additional images that I won't necessarily show tonight. But this is really cool stuff. So I hope people are as excited about this as I am. Now, I shared this first one, I think, in the Embryo Machine in the Discord chat a couple days ago, but I'm going to put it up on the screen right now. So here we go. We've got Arachne there. Now this model came off super, super well. Hold on. I need to also put it up on the screen real quick. Give me 1 second. So I had mentioned in one of the previous episodes that Arachne was one of the models that made me the most nervous because it required the most creative interpretation of what this model looked like beyond what we could see in just the forward-facing illustration that we have in the game. As mentioned, we don't have any reference pieces for how the sides, the backs, the tops, the bottoms of any of these Embryo Machines look like. We just have what you see in the game assets, just like a shot of the front of the mech. Everything else we've had to create from scratch and kind of make up and envision ourselves of, okay, so what do we think the bottom of this spider-like mecha would look like? And so fortunately, the sculptor, the renderer is is fantastic when it comes to kind of filling in the gaps. So he was able to fill in the gaps here with Arachne. I mean, better than I could have ever imagined. I mean, this is super detailed. It's super cool. Now, the first one that I'm showing you here is pretty much exactly what the illustration in the game looks like. It's from a slightly different angle, but still, seeing it rendered in 3D is mega cool. I mean, just to see that shoulder launcher over there is just rad as hell. There are also no problem points on this particular file. So I had mentioned that the Hystrix model might have some problem points that could crop up when we're test printing the models. So I'm a little worried about Hystrix just because he's got some spiky bits that I'm like, I don't know if that's going to actually print. Arachne, though, a lot of flat surfaces, a lot of expansive surfaces that are going to print and paint super well. Just a lot of open space here, you know, on the front of his head there. I mean, I love his head. It's so fucking cool. But I mean, the front of his head, his back, I'll show off some pictures here in a second. I mean, just a lot of room for great painting to be highlighted here. I love the club. I think the club looks great. This giant shoulder missile, super cool. I mean, it just turned out super well. But like, as you see, like under here, you know, over in this area, I'm pointing to this area because it's kind of off my screen right now, but we just sort of had to picture what that might look like under there. You can see it a little bit better. I'm going to show you image 2 here. Someone in the chat said, let's see here. Are these for 3D printing? Yes, they are, Fry Guy. It's most likely a render model. Yes, that's also correct, Joey. One of the add-ons for the game is files to 3D print the mechs. So I do think these are for that. Yes, that's what these are for. So you will, if you back this, or if you have no idea what the hell I'm talking about, and you didn't back Embryo Machine, you're like, what are you showing on the screen right now? We offered a digital STL file option for folks to basically 3D print their own miniatures. I didn't want to bear the cost of miniatures for Embryo Machine, and so I said, you know what? I know people want miniatures. I'm not going to do miniatures, but I will meet in the middle, and we will do the digital files, and we will create those, and then you can have them and you can print them off, you know, on your 3D printer or wherever you need to print them off at. So that's what you're looking at right now. Let's see here. Okay, so the next image we got here. So this required just complete interpretation. This was like, you know, artistic expression at its finest here. We had no image, you know, no reference images for what the back of Arachne would look like. Now we had toyed around with the idea of, you know, this back element over here, this giant rear here, the flat surface. We had kind of messed around with ridging that a little bit. We had thrown some line work there. Thought, well, you know, maybe we could doll it up, and ultimately we decided, you know what, Arachne is such like it's a complicated mech, but it's pretty basic in its design, and it's very utilitarian in how it approaches its overall construction of how that mech is constructed. And so we thought, you know what, a giant flat surface probably makes a lot more sense for this particular mech. I mean, we were trying to think about, you know, how this thing was constructed and who would have constructed it, and how, and I'm talking like, you know, story-wise, lore-wise stuff, you know, how they would have gone about constructing this thing. And ultimately we decided, you know what, the giant flat surface on the back actually gives it a lot of character. It's a great runway for a big brush. We also had to kind of mess with over here, if you look on the right side, what would be like the backside of the missile. We had to mess with what that contraption would look like, what that machinery would look like, how it would socket into one another. And so it really came down to, you know, the renderer and I saying, all right, So how would this work in in real life? What would need to be in these spots, and what would these mechanisms need to look like for there to be, extremities off this spider-like mech? And that's when we came up with, well, what you're looking at right now. Even the back legs here. Yeah, we had a reference for what some of the front legs looked like, but it was one of those situations of like, all right, do we make any changes to the backside of these legs? Are there any extra variations? Are there any extra details that we want to put on the backside that you wouldn't see on the front side? We also had to kind of just take some liberties and guesses of how these things would be positioned in some situations. I mean, Arachne was super hard. I suspected it would be, and it definitely was. I think the final count for Arachne, I may have shared this already, was around the 40-hour mark. He ended up going back through and making a few changes. So I think it was actually like, when all was said and done, I think it was more like 42 hours. So I mean, some serious time went into making sure that this looks the best that it can. We probably used more flat area surfaces on Arachne than we have on the rest of the mechs. But it really made sense for Arachne for some of these larger parts to have that just really clean, sleek finish to it. Let's see here. Were there ever any considerations into how the model would be printed on a DLP SLA printer? Yeah, so a lot of considerations went into a lot of things when I was sitting down with the renderer, and we're like, all right, so people are going to be printing these off on whatever 3D printer they have at their disposal. How do we make a model that is going to work regardless of your printer? How do we make a model that is going to look good on any printer that someone might have? Now, there's no guarantee that one person's printer is going to be able to produce the same caliber of miniature as the next person's, right? I mean, that's just the way it goes. But it's when we're designing them, we had that in mind to ensure that regardless of what printing device you were using and the quality of that printing device, that you would still be able to produce a miniature that looked good, that painted well, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm trying to think of conversations about DLP printers specifically. I'm sure, I mean, so I've been working with this renderer long before the campaign ever went live. And I'm sure at some point we discussed DLP or SLA printers, but nothing's coming to mind specifically about us saying, you know what, let's think about the DLP printer when we're modeling this backside of Arachne. I don't think we had those specific of conversations, but we did have conversations about, all right, there are many different printers in the world. How are we going to address that? And you can't address it perfectly. You just can't, but you try to get as close to it as you possibly can. I've got to do my own test prints. I'm waiting for the final two to finish up, and then I'm going to do my own test prints, and then we'll kind of adjust accordingly. The good news about the STL files is, sure, people might get them before the games ship out in December, but unlike the actual game components that are going to be printed and then shipped, we're on a tight timeline. We have deadlines there. We've got to be wrapped up soon on all of those files to begin the back and forth. But with the printer, to ensure everything goes off smoothly and the proofs come back normal and we make changes, et cetera, et cetera. And so there are very strict deadlines on that aspect of Embryo Machine. But when it comes to the STL files, if they're delivered in December, they're delivered in December. If they're delivered in like September, okay, that's cool. Good. We're ahead of schedule. But to me, I'm like, I've got until December to figure this out, and we're going to make sure we figure this out in the right way. And it'll probably, once we do our test printing, it'll probably mean we're going to go back through. I mean, I can't even say probably. It will mean we'll go back through and we'll make adjustments as needed. That's what we are going to do. And we've got the time to do that. So we're going to take our time with getting these models right. But I suspect we will run into folks who are like, yo, this isn't working with what I've got. What can you do about that? And we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. So I said we didn't just have Arachne to show off tonight. We've got a brand new mech to show off tonight, because I said we did show off at least one image of this Arachne render earlier in the week, but this one no one has seen yet. So you've got a world exclusive. All right, Fornice. So I have talked on many occasions about how much I love Fornice. I have mentioned my love of Fornice in multiple updates and multiple times in the Discord chat, multiple times here on the stream. I love Fornice. And so it was important that we got Fornice's render right for all of the obvious reasons, but also because it's my favorite and we better get it right for my sake. And here's what we came up with. So Fornice is a small mech. If you've seen the assets and if you looked at comparison illustrations between Fornice and any of the other mechs, even kind of like that middleware mech, Fornice is still tiny. Tiny in structure, tiny in height. And so it was important that the model reflect that as well. And so this model looks very different than the rest of the models. I mean, obviously it looks very different than Arachne, but I am super happy with how this model turned out. Now, Fornice is also one of the, I would say, lesser ornate models in the game. I mean, just how it was designed, how Dari designed it was a very straightforward looking mech. I mean, it's got great character, it's got great lines, it's sleek as hell, and it's got, a lot of unique personality elements to it. But when you compare it to like a Hystrix, or you compare it to an Arachne, it's a more basic structure. It's a more basic frame, and so you see that here. But we were still able to capture kind of the small elements that do add to the character of Fornice. Like these pockmarks around the legs, around the shoulders, up around the head. And sorry, I'm circling things on my screen, realizing that I'm not circling them on the main screen here. So let me transfer this over to my main screen. So, the markings here and here, around the wrist here, the thighs, even around the sides here. It's just it's a nice looking model. I'm really happy with how Fornice came out. Now, one thing that we might ultimately do once we come back from test printing is I might slim up. I might ask the artist to slim up the frame just a little bit to kind of squish him a little bit. He looks slightly meaty right now. And I mean, it's not like Fornice is like a super slender mech, but he's pretty slender. And without having the actual miniature in front of me and having it printed off myself, I can't make an accurate judgment on whether this is going to come off as a meatier than intended model. But from this angle, from this forward-facing angle, like right here, it looks like it could be a little meaty. So I might want to kind of slim them down a little bit and see how that goes. But I'll need to hit the test printer before that happens. So there's image one. Now, all right. So, so the front side of Fornice, very basic, right? Pretty straightforward. Not the case with the backside. This took time. In fact, the majority of the render time was spent on the backside of Fornice. No references whatsoever. We both decided, the modeler and I, we both decided that flat area surfaces like on Arachne was not going to work on Fornice. It wouldn't make sense. It's not what we pictured. And so I remember telling him, like, all right, let's really do this up. Like, let's do this right. The backside needs to be very detailed. Just knowing how Fornice gets around the battlefield and knowing the type of mech that it was, I felt like Fornice probably would have a more complicated backside than the average mech. And so far, this is one of the most detailed backsides we've done of any of the mechs thus far. I'm trying to think who else that we've done so far had a really ornate backside. I mean, Hystrix's backside was pretty ornate, but I think this is even more complicated. I mean, just the legs alone, it's just, I mean, such great detail. And, I'm not like, when it comes to stuff like this, I don't have like a great vision. I can explain like I can explain sort of the larger elements of what I'm looking for when it comes to really like dialing in some kind of visual presentation. But especially when it comes to sci-fi, I can't get into the specifics of like, oh, we should have like a gear here, we should have a valve here, we should have uh, an auxiliary output here. We should have a vent here. Like, I just don't. I can't picture things in that way. Um, so I said, I basically said like, all right, let's do this. Like, give me something that's going to impress me. And this is, this is what he came back with. And I remember this was one of the few instances where he was like, all right, so what do you think of this? Now, most of the time up until now, he's come to me and he's like, all right, what do you think of this? And I'm like, okay, so let's change this. Let's do this. Let's make this bigger. Let's take this away, whatever. This was, I think the first time that I was like, well, that's it. Okay, done, done, done. We're not making any changes. That's the one. That's the one. And I mean, with these things, you know the one when you see the one. And this was the one. This was the one for me. No changes were made. Now, that doesn't mean that we won't make changes once we do our test prints, but right now, this is exactly what I had envisioned, despite not knowing what I had envisioned. It was one of those instances of like, that's exactly what I always pictured I wanted, except I told you nothing about wanting any of this. So, I was really happy with what we were able to do here with Fornice. So that's Arachne. That's Fornice. We've got 2 more to do, and then we'll get to that test print stage, and we'll make corrections. The solo rules of Embryo Machine are done. The only thing I haven't decided if I'm going to show off the solo rules in tomorrow's update like I had originally anticipated. And I think in the last Embryo Machine update, I said I wanted to show off the solo rules on the next update, which would have been the end of March, or in this case, early April. The only thing that would prevent me from showing off the rules in tomorrow or Friday's update would be someone had brought up, they had given us some feedback somewhere on the campaign page about like, hey, it would be great to be able to have a solo mode where I can run multiple mechs against multiple mechs instead of just like a 1v1 kind of thing. It'd be awesome if I could do 2v2, I could control 2 mechs and I'd be going up against 2 AI mechs. So, I took that to Mosaic, and said, would this be possible? I mean, Embryo Machine is not the mech game that I think a lot of people think it is. Embryo Machine is a light deck constructing game that uses mechs for movement. It is not a miniatures war game. It definitely has elements of a miniatures war game in it. Absolutely. All day long, it's got elements of that genre. But it's also got heavy elements of a card game, something a bit lighter than a war game. And so I do think that people might look at Embryo Machine and say, hey, it would be great to have this kind of mode in it, because that kind of mode has worked in a more traditional miniatures war game. And, I don't like fault any backer for ever giving feedback. Like, that's the part of the backing experience. It's like, it's fun to do that. But they don't know the game the way that we know it. And they certainly don't know the game in the same way that the designers know it. And so, I took that to Mosaic, and they came back with, well, we could make that work. It would have a lot of elements of chance involved in it. And I don't know if we necessarily want to add any further elements of luck in the Embryo Machine than what's already there. And so Mosaic actually gave me a whole outline of like, okay, but if you want to do this, here's how we would do it. It's about a page of additional rules. And to be honest, I don't know what I want to do with it. So I might just show off the solo rules and say we might make some additional changes to this. I don't know what I want to do with those additional rules. I may ultimately decide like, this is just going to water down the whole thing, even though it might make it seem like there's, additional ways to play this solo mode, 2v2 instead of 1v1. I don't necessarily want to put something in there just to like bolster the amount of modes that it has if the extra modes are going to be trash. That's what I worry about. I think this backer was even like, oh, it'd be great to have like 3v3. And I'm like, I don't think it would be. But maybe 2v2 would work. I don't know. So, yes, Silent Frank in the chat said, solo rules, so much hype. Yeah, absolutely. I was really excited about being able to, include a solo mode in the game. I mean, talk about something that was not involved in the original Japanese release. I mean, that was something that was totally ours. So I like that. Maybe print the 1v1 rules and put up the 2v2 rules on the website as an extra side. Actually, that's a great idea. That way I like that idea. I don't like making decisions right on the spot, but if I was the type of person to make decisions right on the spot, I would say that's what I would do. It keeps it official, but not too official. To me, like the official stuff is the stuff that's in the printed rulebook. Anything that comes through other means, through the website or whatever, also official, definitely. Maybe not as official as the printed rulebook. I might be the only one who thinks of things in that way, but because I think of things in that way, that actually might make me feel better as the localization studio behind this. That might make me feel better about the product we're presenting if we can still honor that 2v2 solo mode, but not necessarily have it in the box. Because again, I don't want people to look at that 2v2 mode and say like, this is shit, like, and then have that reflect poorly on the overall product. Whereas if you've got to seek out that 2v2 solo mode, I think there's less of an expectation associated with that kind of thing. You can always just leave the crazy ways to play to house rules, let it spread from the Discord out. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, early on, I think I was asked multiple times by folks in the campaign, like, how open are you to community made content? And like for every game, I'm open to community made content all day, every day. Love community made content. People are engaging with your game. They like your game enough to spend time creating new content for it. Fuck yeah, I love it. But that's totally true for Embryo Machine as well. In fact, I expect that there's probably going to be more fan made content for Embryo Machine than any of our other games. Even though some of our other games like Wild Hunt Festival would really also, I think fan-made content would be great for that game as well. Like really, really good. Same with Testament. Probably a little harder for Testament, but Embryo Machine makes a lot of sense with fan-made content. I hope to be able to foster that kind of community around Embryo Machine. And perhaps that's one of the ways to do it. I need to think on it again. Like I said, I'm not the type of person who just makes a decision right on the spot. So I need to consider multiple things, but all y'all's feedback has been great. Someone said it's official, but without strong guarantee to fun or cohesion. Yeah, that's exactly right, Si. Okay, so that is episode 10 in the books, folks. We covered a lot of ground tonight. This was a long episode. Thanks for sticking with me this entire time. Sorry about the technical troubles and getting off to a late start. Hopefully that won't happen again. If you have questions for me along the way, drop them in the Discord chat. If you're catching this for the first time, join the Discord. Drop your questions. We've got a whole channel specifically just for LionWing Talks questions. Or you can reach out to us on social, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. It's at LWing Publishing. You can find us there anytime. We'll do this again next Wednesday at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And remember, we'll probably be doing episode 2 of LionWing Plays next Monday at 9 p.m. EST. So thanks everyone so much for joining us, and hopefully you enjoyed what we had on tap tonight. We'll see you again next week. Take care now. Bye.